In a quiet town near Chicago, Emily Parker, a 28-year-old dancer, watches life pass her by from her wheelchair. Paralyzed and alone after a tragic accident, she believes her world has ended. Until one rainy afternoon, a kind stranger named Ryan Cooper, 30, walks into her life. With patience, warmth, and small acts of kindness, he helps her rediscover hope, courage, and the possibility of standing again. This is a story of healing, love, and finding light when all seems lost. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The small town of Willow Creek, just outside Chicago, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A quiet, slow-moving town wrapped in the scent of roasted coffee and rain-soaked sidewalks. Every morning, the same faces passed by the corner cafe. "Morning brew!" Among those faces sat Emily Parker, 28, a once graceful ballet dancer whose dreams had been stolen by a tragic car accident 2 years earlier. The accident left her paralyzed from the waist down, and though her body healed on the surface, her spirit had grown silent, locked in a world that no longer danced. Emily's routine rarely changed. She would wheel herself to her favorite window seat, order a cup of vanilla latte, and watch life move around her. The laughter of friends, the hurried footsteps of people late for work, and the chime of the cafe door were her connection to a world she no longer belonged to. Her mother had passed away years ago, and her father worked overseas. Loneliness became her uninvited companion, one she could neither escape nor embrace. She hid behind polite smiles, but inside she longed for something more than pity or polite conversation. Rain began to fall one grey afternoon, turning the streets into silver reflections. Emily watched as droplets slid down the glass like soft tears. She had come to love rainy days. They made the world slower, quieter, almost as broken as she felt. When she finally decided to leave, she realized the slope outside the cafe had turned slippery. Her wheelchair's front wheel caught in a small crack, refusing to move. She pushed harder, but the wheels only spun helplessly, splashing water onto her clothes. For a moment, frustration burned through her chest and she whispered, "Not again." Just as she was about to give up, a man's voice broke through the sound of rain. "Hey, let me help you." Emily looked up to see a tall man with short brown hair, drenched in rain but smiling as if the storm didn't bother him. His eyes were warm, steady, the kind that made you feel safe without words. He knelt beside her, his hands gentle but sure as he lifted the wheelchair slightly and freed the stuck wheel. "There you go," he said, brushing rain from his arms. "You all right?" She nodded, surprised not by his help, but by the kindness in his tone, like he saw her. Not the chair. The man introduced himself as Ryan Cooper, 30, a local mechanic who had recently moved to town after leaving the army. His smile was easy, his voice calm. Emily thanked him quietly, expecting him to leave, but instead he walked her back into the cafe. "You look like you could use another coffee," he said lightly. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't refuse. They sat near the window, she in her chair, him across the table, and shared coffee while rain whispered against the glass. She found herself laughing softly at his stories about fixing old trucks and getting lost in small towns. Ryan had a warmth about him, the kind of quiet strength that made people open up without realizing it. He didn't ask about her accident, didn't look at her with pity. Instead, he spoke as if she were just another person, not a broken one. Emily noticed that, and something inside her, something that had been cold for so long, began to thaw. When he left that day, he smiled and said, "Maybe I'll see you here again." She didn't answer, but the corner of her lips lifted in the faintest hint of a smile. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the stranger who had walked into her rainy world like sunlight through clouds. It had been 2 years since anyone had sat with her just to talk. No sympathy, no awkward silence. Just two people sharing a moment. She remembered his hands, rough but kind, and the way he didn't seem uncomfortable with her chair. It was small, ordinary even, but to Emily it meant everything. It reminded her that she was still part of the living world, not just watching it from behind glass. The next morning, she found herself hoping to see him again. She scolded herself for it. People like Ryan didn't just appear twice. But as the bell over the cafe door chimed, there he was. Same smile, same calm eyes. "Guess what?" he said cheerfully. "My truck broke down right around the corner. Looks like fate wants me to have coffee again." Emily laughed, genuinely laughed, and for the first time in years it didn't feel forced. They talked for hours that day, about music, books, and how he once fixed a car with nothing but duct tape and determination. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became a familiar sight. Sometimes he dropped by the cafe. Other times he waited outside, pretending he just happened to be nearby. Emily knew better, but she didn't mind. They developed a quiet friendship, gentle, unspoken, healing. He told her about his time in the army, how he'd lost friends, how the silence after war had felt heavier than the battles themselves. In return, she told him about dancing, how movement had once been her language. When she spoke of the accident, her voice trembled, but Ryan listened without pity, only understanding. Winter rolled in, painting Willow Creek in shades of white and silver. The cold mornings made Emily's fingers ache, but the cafe stayed warm, not just from the heaters, but from the laughter she and Ryan shared. Sometimes he'd tease her about her serious coffee choices. Other times, he'd fix the squeaky wheel on her chair without being asked. Once when she caught him doing it, she said softly, "You don't have to keep fixing things." He smiled and replied, "Maybe not, but I like helping things move again." Something in those words stayed with her long after he left. Deep down, Emily began to feel something she hadn't dared to name. Hope. Not the loud, unrealistic kind, but a small spark that whispered maybe. Maybe she could still have a life that meant something. Maybe kindness wasn't gone from the world. Maybe people could see past the chair, past the pain. Ryan never treated her like someone who needed saving. He treated her like someone worth knowing. And that simple truth began to heal parts of her heart she didn't even know were still broken. One evening, as snowflakes began to fall softly outside the cafe window, Ryan placed a small paper crane on her table. "For luck," he said. Emily smiled, holding the delicate folded bird between her fingers. "You really believe in luck?" she asked. "No," he said, his eyes warm and steady on hers. "I believe in people who don't give up." At that moment, Emily realized something she hadn't felt in 2 years. She wanted to live again. And maybe, just maybe, the man who helped her out of the rain was meant to help her find her way back to the light. The following weeks slipped by quietly, filled with warmth that Emily hadn't known in years. Ryan had become more than just a kind stranger. He was now a constant in her days. Every morning she'd roll into the cafe, half expecting to see him there, and somehow he always was. Sometimes he sat with a cup of black coffee already waiting for her. Other times he'd appear at her side just as she was about to open the cafe door, pretending to be surprised. They shared laughter that melted winter's chill, and in those moments the walls around Emily's heart began to crumble. Ryan's mechanic shop was only a few blocks from the cafe. One afternoon, when her wheelchair made a strange grinding sound, he offered to take a look at it. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to be a burden, but his easy smile made it hard to refuse. "I fix things for a living," he said simply. "And besides, I like a good challenge." That night, he loaded her wheelchair into his truck with careful hands, promising to bring it back the next morning. She hadn't realized how strange it would feel to be without it, how vulnerable she was without those wheels. When Ryan returned the next day, the wheelchair looked different, cleaner, polished, with the wheels gliding smoother than before. "You didn't just fix it," she said, surprised. He shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe added a few upgrades. Stronger motor, better balance. You deserve something that keeps up with you." Emily couldn't help but smile, touched by the effort. No one had done something that thoughtful for her in a long time. "You're not charging me for this, are you?" she asked softly. "Not a chance," he said. "Just promise me you'll take it somewhere beautiful this week." That promise stayed with her. A few evenings later, Ryan showed up outside her house with a picnic basket and that mischievous grin of his. "Come on," he said. "We're going to see the sunset." She tried to protest, but he didn't let her. He wheeled her through the park, the path glowing golden under the falling light. The lake shimmered like molten glass, reflecting the sky's deep orange and pink. It was breathtaking, something she hadn't experienced since before her accident. Ryan spread a blanket on the grass and sat beside her, quiet, content, watching the horizon fade into twilight. As the colors deepened and stars began to blink in the sky, Emily found herself talking, really talking. She told him about the night of the accident, the sound of metal crushing, the silence after. She told him about the stage she had loved, the way music used to run through her veins, and how it all disappeared in a single heartbeat. Ryan didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he said softly, "You're still that dancer. Emily, you just found a different stage." The words sank into her soul, simple yet powerful, and for the first time, she believed them. Their friendship deepened as winter melted into spring. They spent afternoons fixing things together at his shop, sometimes her chair, sometimes old bikes that neighborhood kids brought in. Ryan had a way of making everything seem easy, like life wasn't something to survive, but something to mend, one piece at a time. Emily loved watching him work. The concentration on his face, the grease on his hands, the gentle patience in his voice. One day she asked, "Why do you do it all?" He paused before answering, "Because I know what it's like to be stuck, and how good it feels when someone helps you move again." Emily never asked about his scars, but she could see them, faint lines across his arms, a quiet pain behind his smile. Ryan carried his past with quiet strength. Once she found an old photograph in his workshop, a group of soldiers, arms around each other, smiling under a blazing sun. Ryan was in the middle, younger, but with the same steady eyes. "I lost some of them," he said quietly when he caught her looking. "I guess fixing things helps me fix myself too." Emily didn't know what to say. She simply reached out and touched his hand. Sometimes silence was enough. One afternoon, as they rolled through the park, Emily's wheelchair suddenly stopped. Ryan bent down to check it, muttering something about the battery. But instead of fixing it right there, he looked at her with a playful grin. "Guess I'll have to push you home." She laughed, cheeks flushing. "You're impossible. I've been told that," he said. As he pushed her along the path, they talked about dreams. Hers of opening a small dance school for disabled kids, his of expanding his garage to help veterans rebuild their lives. "Maybe we can do both someday," he said. "Together." She didn't answer, but her heart did. Days turned into weeks and life slowly filled with color again. Emily began therapy sessions more often, encouraged by Ryan's quiet belief in her. He was always there, not to carry her, but to stand beside her. One day, as she practiced moving her legs in the therapy room, she managed a slight twitch of her right foot. It was small, almost invisible, but enough to make her eyes fill with tears. She called Ryan that night, voice trembling. "It moved," she whispered. On the other end, he just said, "I knew it would. You've got more strength than you think." Ryan's faith in her became the light she followed. Each step, or rather each movement, was a victory. She found herself smiling again, laughing again, even dreaming again. The woman who once sat behind the cafe window watching life go by was gone. In her place stood someone braver, softer, alive. Ryan had become her anchor, not because he saved her, but because he reminded her she didn't need saving. He showed her that broken things could still be beautiful, and that sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks, but with quiet hands and steady patience. On a calm spring evening, they sat outside the cafe where it all began. The air was cool, scented with coffee and lilacs. Emily looked at the world moving around her, people laughing, cars passing, children running, and she didn't feel left behind anymore. Ryan handed her a small charm, a tiny silver dancer. "For your new beginning," he said. She held it close, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything," He smiled softly. Don't thank me, Emily. You did the hard part. I just helped you see what was still possible. And under the fading light of evening, she finally believed him. Spring turned into summer, and the town of Willow Creek began to glow again. The cafe windows were lined with flowers, and laughter filled the air. Emily had come a long way. Her therapy sessions were now full of progress. Each day, her legs responded more than the last. She could move her toes, lift her knees slightly, even stand for a few seconds with support. Every tiny victory felt like a miracle. Ryan was there for every step, his proud smile never fading. "You're unstoppable," he would tell her, and somehow hearing it from him made her believe it too. Their bond had grown into something deeper than either of them expected. It wasn't just friendship anymore, it was love, though neither dared to say it out loud. The way Ryan looked at her said it all. When she smiled, he smiled. When she struggled, he stayed by her side until she was ready to try again. Sometimes they didn't need words at all, just the quiet understanding that their hearts had already found each other. And though Emily still feared losing that fragile happiness, she knew she couldn't hide from it forever. One evening, the sky burned with a golden sunset. Emily asked Ryan to take her back to the lake, the same place he'd brought her months ago when she still believed life was over. This time, she didn't want him to push her chair. She wanted to try walking, even if it was just a few shaky steps. Ryan hesitated, concern flickering in his eyes, but she nodded firmly. "I need to do this," she said. With his hand in hers, she stood slowly, her legs trembling, the earth solid beneath her feet. One step, then another. Tears streamed down both their faces. When she finally sat back in her chair, Ryan crouched beside her, his voice breaking. "You did it, Emily. You walked." She smiled through tears. "No, Ryan, we walked." He laughed softly, pressing his forehead against hers, the moment heavy with unspoken love. From that day on, therapy became not just about recovery. It was about rediscovering herself. Every week, her strength grew, and soon she could walk short distances with a walker. The doctors called it unusual progress. Emily called it hope. And hope, she realized, was stronger than any medicine. With Ryan's encouragement, Emily decided to do something she had only dreamed about: teaching dance again. She rented a small studio space downtown, wide enough for both wheelchairs and standing frames. She named it Steps of Hope. Her first students were a group of children with disabilities. When she played the music, their faces lit up just like hers used to. Ryan helped build ramps, painted the walls, and even installed mirrors by himself. Watching the kids dance, some in chairs, some standing, filled Emily's heart with a joy she hadn't felt in years. It was more than teaching. It was healing. The studio quickly became a local sensation. Parents from nearby towns brought their kids, touched by Emily's story. Local newspapers called her the dancer who refused to give up. Emily didn't care about fame. What mattered was the laughter echoing through her studio every evening. Sometimes Ryan would sit at the back, watching her with quiet admiration as she guided the children's movements. When she caught him staring, she'd blush, pretending not to notice. But deep down, she knew love had already bloomed between them, steady and kind, just like the man who had helped her believe again. One night, after closing the studio, Ryan waited outside with 2 cups of coffee. "You look tired," he said, handing her one. "You look proud," she teased. They sat on the bench under the streetlights, sipping their drinks as crickets chirped in the distance. "You changed lives, Emily," he said. She shook her head softly. "No, you did. You changed mine first." For a long moment they just looked at each other, the world around them fading into silence. Then Ryan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and finally said the words that had been waiting in his heart. "I love you." Emily froze, tears filling her eyes. It wasn't surprise she felt, it was relief. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that," she whispered. Ryan smiled, his voice low and steady. "I meant it the first day I saw you. You were sitting in the rain, trying to move forward, and I knew I'd never meet anyone stronger." She laughed softly, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. You walked into my life when I'd already given up on everything. I don't know how to thank you. Just keep walking, he said. That's all I need. Months passed, and their love grew stronger with each shared sunrise. They began organizing small community events, fundraisers, workshops, and outreach programs to help disabled people get mobility aids for free. Ryan used his mechanical skills to repair old chairs, while Emily shared her story to inspire others. Together, they built a foundation, Walk Again project, dedicated to helping those who had lost hope find their way back to life. The town of Willow Creek embraced their mission, and soon, their story spread far beyond the small cafe where it all began. One evening, as the town gathered for the grand opening of their new community center, Emily stood before the crowd without her wheelchair, supported only by a cane. She spoke into the microphone, her voice steady, her eyes shining. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over, she began, but someone reminded me that broken doesn't mean hopeless. Sometimes all we need is one person who believes we can stand again. The crowd erupted into applause, and as Ryan stepped onto the stage beside her, she turned and whispered, "You were that person." He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "And you were my reason." When the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Emily and Ryan stood beneath the starlit sky, hand in hand. The air was cool, gentle, filled with the quiet hum of life. "Do you ever think about that day in the rain?" she asked. "Every day," he said softly. "Because that's when I found the person who taught me what healing really means." She leaned against him, her heart full. The cafe lights flickered in the distance, the same place where their story began, a reminder that even in the darkest storms, kindness can walk in unexpectedly and change everything forever. And this time, Emily didn't just watch life through the window. She lived it step by step, beside the man who walked into her world and taught her how to walk again.